Hi, this is Ralph Klishevich, producer for Perpetual Process. So today we're going to talk about mixing of this track, Make It Easy. In the previous tutorials we talked about how we recorded all the parts, and right now we're going to talk about how we mix things. And mixing brings the track to life. When you record, you just want to make sure everything gets into the computer clean. But in mixing is where the track gains its personality. You make a lot of creative choices at this point in terms of how everything will sound together, how things are going to sit against each other. So I'm not going to mix everything from scratch because that takes hours upon hours. Okay, so I've already mixed this track, so I'm going to let you listen to it. Make it easy. Okay, so that's how everything sounds together, and I'm going to break this tutorial into two parts. First, I'm going to talk about drums and bass, because that's where I start all mixing. And then we're going to talk about vocals. In part two, we'll talk about vocals and the rest of the synths and keyboards. And then some tips on mastering, how to make everything sound much more professional. Okay? So, when I start mixing, I always, as I said, I always start with drums and bass, but more specifically, I want to establish first and foremost the relationship between a kick and a bass. So here we're back in Studio One. As you can see, I have all these tracks that I've recorded before that I've showed you. Here's our kick. I'll let you listen to it. I'm going to solo it first. So it's got a nice deep punch to it, and that's what we want to achieve with a kick. You don't necessarily want to always hear it, but you want to feel it, and it's got to cut through the mix, in my opinion. I mean, if you listen to a lot of like the 90s grunge rock, for example, the kicks never really punch through, versus because all the sounds blended together. That was sort of their goal. Big, loud, sort of sloppy, in a good way. Where you hear, for example, some of the EDM right now, the kick is cutting through everything, and they actually use a lot of what's called sidechaining to really, when the kick comes in, everything sits underneath that kick during a kick. So it's just a different approach, different technique. But I like to have my kick to sort of punch through. So I like that sort of punchy sound to it. Now, I want to let you hear the kick by itself, dry, without any plugins, and I'll sort of go over how I mix this. As you can hear, there's not much to it. So the first thing that I add is I really like analog emulations for mixing everything. That's where I start off with. Analog emulations, both the EQs, compressors, not only do they provide EQs and compressors, but they also add characters, and each one of them is slightly different. This particular one, this is made by Nomadfactory. I really like it specifically for drums. Okay, it gives you a nice sort of brilliant sound for the top end, and also it gives me the punchy and the meaty sort of sound for the kicks and toms and such. So what did I do over here? What do we have over here? For the kick, probably the most important part of it, which you want to look at, is we have EQ over here section, we have a limiter and a compressor. At the EQ, the most important part is right here, the low end. I'm really pushing 70 hertzes, in the frequency of 70 hertzes. That's what I felt that kick had the most sort of punchy, meaty sound to it. And as you can see, I'm pushing quite aggressively, close to 12 decibels. Adding a little bit of low mid, cutting off some high mid, and adding a little bit of treble. At the limiter, I really want to cut off anything below 20 hertzes. All that stuff is just like rumbling hum, the low end that we don't really need. It just makes it's sound that needs to be cut off. It's a cleaner if you cut off some of the really low end stuff. Now, if you look at the compressor, I'm just gently adding a little bit of compression. Okay, the threshold set very low. The ratio is only 2-to-1 ratio, so it's not an aggressive compressor, and it's very fast attack, fast release. So it just comes in quickly and goes away very quickly. So if you look at that gauge over here, what it does, pops up really quickly. Okay, because I sort of like the dynamics of it, but to make it a little bit louder, I add a limiter to the next phase, next part of the chain. So I'm pushing maybe 6.3 decibels. Gets a little bit louder without clipping, because otherwise, instead of dynamic, if you try to make it louder, it would just clip. Okay. And now probably the tool that you're going to see me use quite a bit. This is a Meldeproduction Auto Dynamic EQ. It's a fantastic tool. It's actually an EQ, but it's also a compressor. Each of these bands have a compressor on it and an expander. So take a look at what I'm doing here at the kick. Describes the graph of the curve. See, mostly the kick sits around here between 200 and 30 hertzes. Obviously, I'm limiting it right here. Okay, I'm expanding it once again more at about 65 hertzes. But look at what's going on over here. At the bend number 4, it's actually ducking. Every time it comes in, it ducks. So these parts of the frequencies around 100 hertzes are actually being ducked down every time the kick comes in. Now, you might ask why that is. Well, remember how I talked about the relationship between the bass and a kick? So let's take a look at the bass. Same plugin at that channel. As you can see, number 4, it's set at 102 hertzes. I'm pushing it up a little bit. Okay. And look what happens when I add the kick. Look at band number 3. So basically it ducks not the entire bass, but just a part of frequency. So basically the kick squeezes in at that frequency. So that the bass and the kick don't compete together. So making long story short, I'm picking some frequencies for the kick. The kick is prominent at 70 hertzes. So I'm cutting the 70 hertzes on the bass, and vice versa. The prominent frequency for the bass is at 100, and I'm cutting that in at the bass, at the kick at 100. Okay? So they sort of work together, if that kind of makes sense. And they blend much better together. Okay, so, and obviously they don't compete. Kick dominates the 70 hertzes, where the bass dominates is 100 hertzes. Okay, and the way to do this once again is you have this plugin that I showed you. It's got that compressor just at the band number 3 and number 5, and the kick side chains. It's the signal from the kick is side chained into this compressor number 3, the band, and the kick's just a little bit at number 5. But that's more reserved, I'll show you later on, for vocals. Okay, so in fact, I'm going to show you right now. If I actually unsolo everything and just play the whole track.
Mutual trust we share. This dream of us.
So see, in number 5, this compressor reacts mostly to actual vocals, because I'm sending a side-chaining from the vocals into this this entire plugin. So the bass and the vocals don't compete. Remember, nothing can compete with Katie. Okay, so I found that the 333 hertzes were sort of competing with the vocals. Okay, so that's sort of how that kick and the bass work together. And let me sort of go over the rest of the drums so you can get a feel of what's going on here. But I want to spend a little bit of time with it because I think that's an important relationship. To summarize it, kick and the bass work together. And then what I do almost every single time, I use the side chaining and ducking. Find where the kick is most prominent, in this case 70 hertzes. Find where the bass is most prominent, in this case it's 100 hertzes, and sort of work those together. So the kick cuts off some of the kick cuts off the bass at 70 hertzes, and the bass cuts off the kick at 100 hertzes. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So now let's take a look at the rest of the. Okay, so let's start with this room channel. push to the left. I like to use this Rhode Studios plugin. It's a fantastic plugin for gives presence to the drums. Okay, this is emulated from a console from actual Abbey Roads. Okay, so you can see what I'm using over here. It's a limiter. So without this plugin, you can barely hear it. Okay, with the limiter it makes it louder, and I'm actually pushing a little bit more treble at 42 kilohertz. Adding a little bit more presence, and I'm reducing the low end, okay? And sort of that's, let's see, small tom, I hardly use it, so I didn't use any plugins over here. Floor tom or large tom, I didn't really use any plugins either. It's not a very important part of the sort of the kit. At this point, he doesn't use it that much. Right overhead. Let's listen to it. So as you can see, the overheads, the importance of overheads is to give presence, okay? This is where all the drum instruments blend together with the sound of the room, okay? So it's important to understand that when you record live drums, you're not only recording the instruments, but you're also recording the room in which the drums sit, okay? So that's what we try to achieve over here. I'm using a compressor, not very aggressive. This comes from one of these Waves classic compressors. Very good sounding compressors, all of them. There's 3 of them, the CLA 3A, LA 2A, and I think there's there's third one that I use quite a bit. Not as much, I'm sorry. But I like this one. This is very transparent. Notice this peak reduction, what I think it means is basically it's a combination of some kind of algorithm of ratio versus and the ratio and a threshold, okay? So I'm not using that much, and the gain is just makeup gain on the compressor side. So I'm just basically, it's almost using it like a limiter. I'm sorry, not a limiter, but I'm just making things louder. But I'm not really squashing the upper and lower regions of the frequency, okay, of the sound. And you hear how these sounds blend together well. And of course, that's helped by some of these EQs, the Abbey Roads again. Same concept. Low stuff, go down. 4.2 kilohertz are being increased by 5 decibels. Some extra presence, and a little bit of limiter going out, increasing about 4 decibels, okay? So the limiter is actually pretty aggressive on this end. Without the limiter, it sounds like this. Okay, so yeah, it's aggressive, but as I said, for overheads, you can push a little bit higher because this is where you want to blend things in, okay? And sort of the same thing I'm applying. Once again, slight compression using LA2A. Not very aggressive. But pretty aggressive, once again, limiter, and same thing. High end is pushed, low end is ducked down. I'm not sure how those two, that's how both overheads work together. So the limiter is basically an aggressive limiter. In this case, is going to squash these sounds and then give the big presence, okay, the room sort of presence. Okay, kick I already talked about. Snare, what did I do in the snare? So that's without anything, not much going on. Compressor, the peak reduction, very, almost none, but I'm just making everything louder. I'm just makeup gain increasing by 6.3 decibels, okay? Running these this plugin again, as you can see. Make sure the limiter is set. Anything below 4 should be cut out. As not even compression in, so the compressor is not even coming in here. Adding a little bit low mid and high mid, and a little bit more treble, because the snare I like to have it not to be. A lot of people when they mix snare, they just sort of really even cut out the low mid. I kind of like the presence of it. I think it needs, especially the way that Kevin wants to achieve the sound, have more volume to it. Okay, and then let's see. This EQ again, I'm just expanding a little bit and raising at 320 hertzes. Give it a little bit more snap. I can probably add a little bit more. Okay, and then this room. Let's see, any plugins in here? Just a little bit of, let's see, am I running a limiter again? Without the limiter. So the limiter, once again, brings all these sounds together, glues them together, gives it presence. Same concept, low end, low frequencies, duck down. Increase at 2.8 kilohertz. I find it to be more pleasant, okay? And adding a little bit of noise. So this plugin has a lot of character. It brings that Abbey Road sort of sound to it, okay? So let me play all the drums together so you can get a sense what's going on. So you can see the limiters and overheads give it a nice big sort of room presence. The kick punches through, the snare is snappy. So what's also important to notice that I'm sending all the drums to a bus. Okay, at bus I have a gate, otherwise we have some noise, which we don't want. And I'm adding one more compressor, so to compress all of it together, okay? As you can see, it's not very aggressive compressor, set at a threshold of 7 decibels, makeup gain maybe 10. So it's jumping to about 2.5 compression, but it's making it up at 10 decibels, so it's making it twice as loud, I guess. Not twice as loud, but significantly louder. Sort of slower attack, sort of fast attack, fast release, okay? 2-to-1 ratio. And I really like this compressor. This is they call it a glue, and then it's for a reason. It sort of glues all the dynamics together. I'll let you listen to it without it. With it. So obviously it makes the entire drum kit louder, a little bit more compressed, but not too aggressively. As I said with Kevin, I don't want to compress too much. Yeah, the limiters on the overheads are pretty aggressive, but the compressor itself is not too aggressive because, he does play with a lot of dynamics, so I want to sort of keep that as much as I can in that track, preserve that as much as I can. And then importantly, I'm sending the entire kit to a reverb plugin made by Meldeproduction. So that's with the reverb, and then I'm going to let you play without the reverb. Without the reverb. It's not a huge difference, very minimal, but sort of that's the art of mixing. When there's some decisions that we make, certain things that we do very aggressive, maybe make sure the kick is punchy and overheads, maybe limiters are pretty aggressive, but from then on, the changes are very subtle. You add a little bit of reverb, you add a little bit of mix over here, maybe low overhead, EQs and so on, and progressively the track becomes sounding much better. Okay, and then obviously how everything sounds with the bass. So bass kick punches through, does not compete with the bass, and then the entire drum set has a big presence, like it's sitting in a room and sounds are bouncing off the walls and so on, but not in a noisy sort of way. Okay. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to mention, it's kind of important. Notice that all my drums are going to the drum bus, except if you look at the snare, it's actually going to the main out. Okay, so I'm bypassing the bus. And the reason is, if I found that when I was sending this to, so let me show you how this works. So that's how it sort of sounds right now. But if I send this to my drum bus, I found that the snare was driving the compressor too much, okay, because it's so much louder than everything else. So it sounds much better if you send a main, skip that. I skip the bus, send it just a little bit, signal of it, as you can see over here. Sorry. I'm sending a little bit of signal into the bus, but not too much. But the snare comes out from main, so it's not being compressed by the entire bus. It works separately. So it's louder, okay? It's not being squashed down by that. I'll play again while going through the drums. It just doesn't punch through. It's a minor difference, but at least I notice it, okay? So often, as I said, I send a snare into the main, bypass the bus, okay? So once again, I'll let you play the drums and the bass together, and I'll let you play I'll let you listen to the whole thing. Probably turn the bass down just a little bit. Maybe it's bass heavy. Okay, and I'll let you hear the whole thing. Make sure nothing is muted. Okay. Okay, so that's how it sounds all together. As you can hear, the kick is punching through the bass. You can hear the bass, it blends in, does not compete with the vocals. You can hear all the keyboard parts. So I think overall it's a pretty good mix. But obviously, give me your thoughts, let me know what you think. And I'm inviting you to listen to the rest of that mixing tutorial, where I'm going to actually show you how I mixed the vocals and everything else, and how I master the whole track. Okay? Thank you for watching.